How does he operate?
Kills people.
The description of Andrew Philip Cunanan is simple and frightening. But who is this man, now the focus of a nationwide manhunt, wanted not only for the murder of Gianni Versace, but also for his involvement in a 3-month-long murder spree?
Cunanan is known to be a male prostitute who services affluent clientele. Cunanan should be considered extremely dangerous and armed at this time.
Cunanan, who also goes by Andrew De Silva, has made the FBI's most wanted list, and now reports say that Cunanan and Versace may have been acquainted.
Those that knew him are frightened because he seems now to have totally flipped out.
Andrew is really Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because I would never have believed that he would have been capable of doing what he did.
This acquaintance of Andrew Cunanan, who asked us to conceal his identity, described him as articulate and flamboyant. Authorities say Cunanan's crime spree began in Minneapolis, where the Southern California native is the prime suspect in the murder of Jeffrey Trail, beaten to death with a claw hammer. 4 days later, police discovered the body of Cunanan's former lover, David Matson, not far away. Cunanan has been charged with this murder.
He is a serial killer by the very virtue of his numbers of victims, over 4 at this point, now 5. At the same time, the complexities that go into Cunanan's personality are such that he is really what we call a spree killer.
Police say that spree next led to Chicago and the torture murder of real estate mogul Lee Miglin. Then, on May 9th, Miglin's car was found at the site of a New Jersey cemetery where caretaker William Reese was found shot to death. Tuesday morning, police tied Cunanan in with Versace's murder when they found the red pickup truck that belonged to the dead caretaker. Stolen South Carolina license plates were on the truck. It was owned by Franklin Watts' daughter.
Kind of feel like that the tags were stolen on a shopping day or a school day or somewhere from home.
And inside the truck, police found clothes and even headline articles about Cunanan himself.
He's just rampaging across the country.
Robert Bressler, a former FBI agent and an expert on the behavior of serial killers, theorizes on why Cunanan could have killed Versace.
Either he had a connection with Versace, and he could have had a connection based on the flamboyant personality that he portrayed, or Versace could merely be a symbolic victim, symbolic of the success, the fame, the wealth.
The possible connection between fashion giant Gianni Versace and Andrew Cunanan came out Wednesday when Maureen Orth, a writer for Vanity Fair magazine, reported that the two had met backstage at the San Francisco Opera some years ago. Orth said that she did not believe that the two were intimate.
At Twist, a gay nightclub in South Beach, the manager remembers seeing Cunanan.
But he was a normal-looking guy, so normal. That's the scariest part of it all.
And that may be why the FBI hasn't been able to catch the suspected killer. Nicole Ramirez-Murray, a columnist for the Gay and Lesbian Times in San Diego, knew Cunanan and followed his jet-set lifestyle.
He was a gigolo. He was definitely an American gay gigolo. And he had gentlemen that took care of him. He wanted attention. I would say that he could light up a room with a smile.
Now Ramirez-Murray is in fear, like so many others.
I've been very concerned, as other people have been concerned, of his return to San Diego, so I had an iron gate put on my door. The Versace thing is putting him in a new direction, and I think that direction is headlines. The direction is, I'm going to go down with the biggest headlines I can.
Just where Cunanan is now headed is anyone's guess. So far, he's outwitted authorities.
Andrew wanted people to pay attention to him, and now I think the whole country is paying attention to Andrew.
With his death, Andrew Cunanan gives birth to an unsolvable mystery. Did he kill 5 men? And more importantly, why? Cunanan did not leave behind a suicide note, so police are left with only pieces of the puzzle. But what is becoming more clear is how the suspected serial killer spent the final days of his life. Meanwhile, police are now certain that Cunanan's suicide gun was the same .40 caliber handgun used to kill Gianni Versace and 2 other men. Police found other evidence at the scene of Cunanan's suicide. A small safe was carried from the area. Neighbors around the houseboat continue to report contact with the suspected killer in the days after Versace's murder. Cunanan apparently walked openly around the area. Witnesses reported seeing him suntanning and shopping.
I saw a guy sitting in this bench, reading a book. I went to my boat, like this, and say hi, and he didn't say anything.
Photographer Guillermo Volpe says someone broke into his sailboat right near the houseboat where Cunanan was caught. Volpe shot this home video inside his sailboat just after the intruder, now believed to be Cunanan, left.
I discovered that, all the scene that was in the floor is over there. And this bed, he used this bed to sleep. And I found 2 Wednesday newspaper, one from Italy and the other one from Miami, the Miami Herald. When I saw the newspaper, and everything, I said, wow, maybe it's Cunanan. We went to the police station and tell the history, but they didn't do anything.
The FBI has interviewed the owner of the houseboat, Tursten Reineck, but hasn't disclosed the results of that interview.
If we find that somebody has been harboring him, we'll proceed against him federally, I'll tell you that.
And new reports claim that within 48 hours of Versace's murder, Cunanan contacted an associate trying to get a fake passport. Another report says Cunanan was deeply in debt, owing more than $40,000 to credit card companies and creditors. Cunanan's body remains in custody, but it will soon be turned over to his family. He will be buried near his mother's home in California, taking to the grave many secrets that will never be answered.
The horror began in June 1984. Los Angeles was under siege. Death waited in the dark at the hands of a man they called the Night Stalker. After a 14-month reign of terror, he was finally caught. It was only then that his true identity was discovered. His name, Richard Ramirez.
Richard Ramirez's whole trip was to hide in a tree or hide behind a fence and watch his victims at nighttime and wait into the wee hours of the night. And then, while they slept, creep in, like a coward, and kill them.
The Night Stalker killed at least 13 times, 13 people who were awakened in the night to face death. At least 15 others survived his brutal attacks.
I didn't particularly care for people.
In a rare interview, Ramirez refused to discuss his own crimes, but had this to say about serial killers.
A serial killer comes about by circumstances and like a recipe: poverty, drugs, child abuse. These things, contribute to a person, to a person's frustration and anger, and at some point in life, he explodes.
Perhaps for Richard Ramirez, that anger and frustration turned to rage, which he in turn took out on his victims. His killings were so sadistic and brutal that even experienced detectives were shocked.
He took a woman in her 60s and stomped her to death with his foot, leaving an imprint of a shoe on the side of her face. From that to just executing somebody upon walking into a room after he entered a house. He strangled, he used a ligature, he used a tire iron on a young girl, beat her, left her for dead.
Would your anger subside if you had to wipe up your mother's blood? I couldn't finish it. I had to leave my brother to finish that chore.
Why on earth would you have hurt those people? Why did you kill those people?
No comments. No comments. I cannot answer that at this time.
What was Richard's motive?
To kill.
That's it?
To kill. It's as simple as that.
Richard Ramirez was raised in El Paso, Texas, the youngest of 5 children born to hardworking, strict parents. Eddie Milam was Richard's best friend back then and remembers when he began to change into a troublemaker.
I did start seeing something going wrong with Ricky Ramirez. I think what really messed him up was the acid. He would do a lot of acid. The stealing, I noticed the stealing, and then started as a peeping Tom and things like that.
Ramirez's passion for burglary earned him the nicknames of Ricky the Thief and Fingers, but Eddie knew Ramirez had other serious problems when he was fired from a local hotel.
He said he was fired, he was dismissed due to the cause that he had tried to molest two little kids that were going up the elevator.
By 18, Ramirez was a high school dropout drifting around California. He stayed in Skid Row hotels, never seemed to work, but always had the money to buy cocaine. Friends say the Richard Ramirez they knew didn't date and wasn't the type to commit such heinous crimes. But convicted murderer Martin Kipp, who befriended Ramirez in prison, says he heard another side of the Night Stalker.
Richard told me he needed to associate gruesome violence with sex in order to be completely satisfied. He also told me that he had to violently fantasize about his victims before he could go away sexually gratified.
They are desires, whereas if I didn't give in to them, I would be crushed by them. I believe in the evil in human nature. This is a wicked world, and in a wicked world, wicked people are born. I'm not going to blame society, my race, or people, or anything. It is up to the individual like myself to keep on knocking on whatever door they want to get into.
Because the victims and the methods of killing were so diverse, many experts felt there was no one Night Stalker. Detectives Carrillo and Salerno disagreed and finally broke the case by matching shoe prints. The subsequent trial turned into one of America's most notorious courtroom dramas, punctuated by continual outbursts from Ramirez. In that trial, Ramirez's fascination with Satanism emerged.
As far as Satan is concerned, I believe in a malevolent being. His description eludes me, but I have felt powers that are evil.
After an 8-month trial, Ramirez was convicted of all 13 murders and given multiple death sentences.
I don't care about myself, really. I don't care about what happens to me. I never did, really.
I desensitized myself to it. I don't know, I went to great lengths.
He is pure evil, but you'd never know it by looking at him. But when you hear him, that's another story. His killing field was Milwaukee, and he got away with murder for more than a decade. But how could any of this happen? For the first time ever, Nancy Glass is here inside the world of Jeffrey Dahmer.
Bill, when I sat down opposite Jeffrey Dahmer for this interview, I wondered what he would tell me, how hard it would be to get him to discuss his horrific crimes. What I found was that he was very forthcoming. He volunteered details that may be difficult to hear. I began by asking what he wanted from the men he picked up.
I had these obsessive desires and thoughts wanting to control them, to I don't know how to put it, possess them permanently.
And that's why you killed them?
Right, right. Not because I was angry with them, not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them with me. And as my obsession grew, I was saving body parts such as skulls and skeletons.
Jeffrey Dahmer is recalling his monstrous past. Almost 2 years ago in this little apartment in Milwaukee, police discovered the grisly remnants of one of the most horrible crime sprees in American history. Jeffrey Dahmer, an unassuming chocolate factory worker, would eventually confess that he had seduced, murdered, and dismembered 17 young men. He even ate some of his victims' body parts. He instantly became the center of worldwide media attention, a serial killer unmasked. There were protests and press conferences in Milwaukee as people tried to understand how this could have happened in their midst. How did Jeffrey Dahmer get away with murder after murder for 13 years? How did a boy born into a hard-working, middle-class family turn into the worst kind of monster imaginable? In this exclusive interview, we put those questions to Jeffrey Dahmer himself. We met with him at the maximum security prison where he is serving his sentence of 999 years. For the first time, he talks about his crimes and gives us a chilling look inside the mind of a serial killer.
It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. When you depersonalize another person and view them as just an object for pleasure instead of a living, breathing human being, it seems to make it easier to do things you shouldn't do.
The reason why Jeffrey Dahmer was able to get away with his crimes was because of just what you are seeing here. Jeffrey Dahmer is intelligent and articulate. That is what makes him so frightening. But if you listen carefully to his words throughout this interview, you realize it is a thin disguise.
You do sound, though, like the kind of person who could have said to himself, "This is wrong. I must stop."
I always knew that it was wrong, but after the first killing was not planned. I was coming back from the shopping mall back in '78. I had fantasies about picking up a hitchhiker and taking him back to the house and having complete control and dominance over him.
The hitchhiker's name was Stephen Hicks. He was just 18. Jeffrey Dahmer took him to his parents' house. There he strangled him with a barbell. He dismembered the body and hid it in a drain pipe. It was Jeffrey Dahmer who gave those details to the police in his confession.
No one had a clue as to what was happening for over a decade.
During that time, Jeffrey Dahmer joined the Army and was sent to Germany. He was eventually discharged for a drinking problem and returned to Ohio. 9 years after Stephen Hicks' murder, the killing began again.
What happened to you in the 9 years in between that you were able to stop, that you were able to control yourself?
It just wasn't an opportunity to fully express what I wanted to do. There was just not the physical opportunity to do it then. And I started, when I moved to Milwaukee in '81, I started reading pornography, going to the bookstores. Eventually that led to frequenting the gay bars. And then one time I brought this young man back to the hotel room, the Ambassador Hotel. Was just planning on drugging him and spending the night with him. Had no intention of hurting him. When I woke up in the morning, he had a broken rib here, was heavily bruised. Apparently I had beaten him to death with my fists.
And you have no memory of it?
I have no memory of it. But that's what started the whole spree all over again.
Dahmer says he snuck the corpse of his victim, Stephen Toomey, out of his hotel room in a suitcase. Then he took it to his grandmother's house, where he cut up the body and put it in plastic garbage bags.
When you killed these men, afterwards, were you repulsed? Were you upset?
No, at the time, it was almost addictive. It was almost a surge of energy. I wouldn't have to worry about any of their needs or anything. I just had complete control of the situation.
But Jeffrey Dahmer was out of control. The urge to kill had overpowered him. As police later learned, he wasn't satisfied with his victim's death. He wanted more.
Why did you photograph them?
It was my way of remembering their appearance, their physical beauty. I also wanted to keep something. If I couldn't keep them there with me whole, at least I felt that I could keep their skeletons. And I even went so far as planning on setting up an altar with the 10 different skulls and skeletons.
And what was the purpose of the altar going to be?
As a sort of memorial, a point where I could, I don't know, it's so bizarre and strange, it's hard to describe. A place where I could collect my thoughts and feed my obsession.
When the bodies were still in your apartment, there was no time when you would see them and say, this is grotesque, what have I done?
There were times, but the compulsive obsession with doing what I was doing overpowered any feelings of revulsion.
This man with a quiet, almost shy demeanor became a master manipulator who was able to lure strangers he met at gay bars to his apartment. He was even able to con the police into returning a 14-year-old boy to him after neighbors called 911 upset that the child was in the street naked and bleeding. Dahmer convinced the police that he and the boy were simply having a lover's quarrel.
It's an intoxicated boyfriend of another boyfriend.
Well, how old was this child?
It wasn't a child, it was an adult.
After the police left, Jeffery Dahmer murdered that boy, Conorak synthesomphone. This man says he had a near-fatal encounter with Jeffrey Dahmer.
He wanted to take some picture of my back. He hit me with a rubber hammer on my neck.
He was lucky to escape because by then the killing had become almost routine.
Before you went out to pick up the man, was there any kind of ritual you went through?
I'd go to the nightclubs, drink, watch the striptease shows, and if I didn't meet anyone at the bars, I'd go to the bath clubs and meet someone there, offer them money, and we'd go back to the apartment, have a few drinks. I'd have the sleeping pill mixture already prepared. Person would drink it, fall asleep, and that's when they would be strangled.
Watching the movie Exorcist 3 was also part of his ritual. It put him in the mood for murder.
I felt so hopelessly evil and perverted that I actually derived a sort of pleasure from watching that tape.
Did you like feeling evil?
No, I didn't. But I had tried to overcome the thoughts, and it worked for a while, but eventually I gave in.
While Jeffrey Dahmer may say things today that make it seem like he understands what went on in his mind, he does not. All he can do is tell you what happened, but he cannot stop whatever it is that drove him to kill in the first place.
Do you still feel those same urges? Do you still feel that compulsion, that obsession?
I wish I could say that it just left completely, but no, there are times when I still do have the old compulsions.
Jeffrey Dahmer says as time went on, his mind became more and more warped, and yet he was clever enough to continue to elude police and lure young men to his apartment. We should warn you, the details are very graphic.
I started having these obsessive thoughts when I was about 15 and 16, and they got worse and worse.
What were your fantasies about?
They were sexual fantasies of control, power, complete dominance. They became reality.
Was there pleasure in that fantasy?
There was excitement, fear, pleasure, all mixed together.
Jeffrey Dahmer fulfilled his fantasies by murdering and dismembering 17 young men. In time, his desires became more extreme, his deeds more grotesque. Listen to him talk about the most unnatural things in the most matter-of-fact of ways. That's when you realize that none of it has touched him.
I was branching out, that's when the cannibalism started, eating of the heart and the arm muscle. It was a way of making me feel that they were a part of me. At first it was just curiosity, and then it became compulsive. Then I tried to keep the person alive by inducing a zombie-like state. By injecting first dilute acid solution into their brain or hot water, and it never did completely work.
Could someone like you be stopped? Could you be helped?
No, I was dead set on going with this compulsion. It was the only thing that gave me any satisfaction.
He became so warped by his evil impulses that he even took a victim's head with him to work at the Ambrosia chocolate factory.
I kept the mummified head and skull of one of the victims in a carrying case in my locker at work.
Were you almost flaunting it?
Yes, but that's how strong the compulsion was. That's how bizarre the desire was. I wanted to keep something of the person with me.
Jeffery Dahmer exhibited some disturbing behavior early on. He began drinking heavily as a teenager, dropped out of college, was arrested for indecent exposure, disorderly conduct, and fondling a 13-year-old boy. Tragically, one of his murder victims would be that boy's brother.
Do you know what started it? Was there any kind of incident that you can remember?
To this day, I don't know what started it. And the person to blame is sitting right across from you. That's the only person. Not parents, not society, not pornography. I mean, those are just excuses.
His macabre 13-year crime spree finally ended when this man, Tracy Edwards, brought the police to the infamous apartment. Like the others, he had gone there with the promise of money.
He was listening to my heart, because at a point he told me he was going to eat my heart at that point. I hit him and I ran.
What was the turning point for you that made you suddenly realize that you had done something terribly wrong, something you should be sorry for?
It was the night of the arrest. I have no memory of what happened during the 6 hours before the last victim ran out of the apartment. I heard a knock on the door, and the police were there with the last victim. They asked me where the key was to the handcuffs. My mind was in a haze. I sort of pointed to the bedroom, and that's where they found the pictures. And they yelled, "Cuff him." And I was handcuffed. And it was just the realization that there was no point in trying to hide my actions anymore. The best route was to help the police identify all the victims and just make a complete confession.
When it was revealed that most of the victims were black or homosexual, people in Milwaukee were incensed. Many felt that was why he went after them and why the police didn't seem to care when their families reported them missing.
10 of your 17 victims were black. Were they racially motivated
It was
crimes?
not racially motivated. It was not sexual preference. It was just to find an obsession with the best-looking young man I could find.
While you just heard him say that his sexual preference had nothing to do with the killings, he has not come to terms with his homosexuality.
Never understood it. There was no use trying to fight it because I couldn't rid myself of it. It was too powerful and persistent.
Do you dislike it?
Yes, it's caused a lot of problems for me. A lot of conflicts and unanswered questions.
The conflicts remain with him, and so do his compulsions. But in prison, he finally cannot act on his savage desires.
If you were out on the street now, would you still be committing the crimes?
Probably. If this hadn't happened, there's no doubt I probably would be. I can't think of anything that would have stopped me.
I think that he is proud of what he has done. I think he's proud of the title that he's got, of largest mass murder in the history of the United States. It's sick, but I think that he's proud of it.
I think he took out his sexual fantasies on these boys. He accomplished his goal, and then he murdered them.
I'd castrate him for what he did to me and the others.
These people are talking about John Wayne Gacy. On the surface, the divorced stepfather of two seemed a solid citizen. He owned a successful construction business that he ran from his home in Cook County, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. He was active enough in politics to have had his picture taken with then First Lady Rosalind Carter. But the man who entertained neighborhood children would soon become known as the Killer Clown, a sexual psychopath who lured dozens of young male victims to his house before assaulting and then murdering them. Even with Gacy's handwritten map, it took the police weeks to recover all the bodies he had buried in the crawl space under his house. Gacy had been killing and burying his victims for at least 4 years. 11 of his victims have still not been identified. In 1981, the courthouse here in Cook County, Illinois, was the site of John Wayne Gacy's trial for mass murder. He was convicted and sentenced to death for torturing and then killing 33 young men and boys. 10 years later, he's still alive. But what infuriates the victims' relatives even more than that is Gacy's newfound fame.
Personally, I believe he's the worst animal who has existed during this century.
Terry Sullivan was the Cook County DA who prosecuted John Wayne Gacy. He says that since Gacy has been on death row, he's taken up drawing, then painting, and his ability to sell his artwork for thousands of dollars is like salt in the wounds of his victims' relatives.
Yeah, certainly his abilities to get his name out and his paintings out and all the rest of the things outside of the jail walls is something that just it adds another burden to the back of the victims' families that are out there right now.
2 years ago, Gacy's paintings were exhibited in Boston. The art show consisted of 20 of Gacy's paintings, and it was a complete sellout. As a result of his notoriety, Gacy has received a great deal of mail from people around the country. He corresponds with them on stationery bearing his own personalized letterhead. These letters and others have been compiled in a new book about Gacy and his pen pals. It has reportedly sold a substantial number of copies.
Why should John Wayne Gacy have anything? He should have nothing. All his rights should be taken from him for what he did. I do not feel that a person who has committed so many crimes and hurt so many people should have anything available to him. Nothing whatsoever.
Dolores Nieder's son, John, worked in construction after he got out of the Marines. His last job offer was obviously from Gacy. The police found his remains with the others under Gacy's house.
When you lose a child, it's like taking a little piece of your heart out. Now, Gacy has stolen something from me that I just can't forgive him. I can't forgive that man. Do you blame me? Do you think I have, how can you forgive somebody who ends a part of your life? I can't do it. I don't even think God would expect me to do that, to tell you the truth.
Do you want Gacy executed?
Yes, I do. I want Gacy to die.
The beginning of the end for Gacy began in December 1978 when an investigation into the disappearance of 15-year-old Rob Peast led police to Gacy's house.
We found numerous pieces of identification that belonged to other young male individuals, and it didn't take too long to see that there was a pattern here, that these identifications belonged to people who were missing throughout the Chicago metro area.
In 1978, Joe Kozenzak was the chief of detectives in the Des Plaines, Illinois Police Department. That was where Rob Peast lived before he disappeared. Joe says Gacy confessed to him in lurid detail.
John used to like to read the Bible, certain excerpts from the Bible, to his victims while they were dying, and was essentially not finished with the victims once they died because he was a necrophiliac.
Tell me, how did he lure his victims?
He primarily used the guise of being a police officer. John was into the police thing. He had a Chicago Police Star. He had a car. He'd buy a brand new car every year that would always be black.
On the way to his house, he was boasting that he was a police officer. And he showed me his gun and his car. It looked like a police car, like an unmarked police car. It had a spotlight and everything.
This man, we'll call Jim, doesn't want his identity revealed. He met Gacy in a bar and was invited to his house to do some drugs. For some reason, he survived his ordeal and can now tell us what happened.
Did he give you drugs?
Yeah. And he told me to try this other stuff, it's better. So I tried it, and a minute or so later, I passed out. I ended up in the bedroom. And he was messing me.
He was sexually assaulting you?
Yes. And I tried to push him off, and I couldn't.
You're probably one of the few that ever got away alive. How did you do it?
I don't know. Well, I told him I wanted to go back to my car. And he said, well, okay, I got to go to church anyway, so I'll give you a ride back. And he gave me a ride back, and he gave me a handful of speeders, and I got back in my car and went home.
Like nothing happened?
Yeah.
What was your reaction when Gacy was arrested?
I got lucky. I got lucky he didn't kill me.
But at least 33 others were not as lucky.
It's not fair. It's not fair. When are all his appeals over? When will his execution be carried out? That's what I want to know. Is it going to be in my lifetime or isn't it? And nobody can give me an answer.